6 crew members have tragically lost their lives. 6 Americans who answered the nation's call and will never return home. As their flag-draped remains are being prepared for transport back to families who will forever be altered, the man who sent them into harm's way was on a virtual call with world leaders, claiming that the enemy had already surrendered. This is not a metaphor or hyperbole. It is the documented and confirmed reality of America's ongoing conflict with Iran. A KC-135 Stratotanker, a crucial aerial refueling aircraft that underpins American air power, went down over western Iraq on March 12th during Operation Epic Fury. All 6 crew members were confirmed deceased, and the cause of the incident is still under investigation. According to Central Command, CENTCOM, it was neither hostile fire nor friendly fire. A large American warplane simply fell from the sky over what officials described as friendly airspace. The explanation given to the American public is essentially, "We will get back to you." Meanwhile, during a virtual G7 summit held just days before the bodies were recovered, the President of the United States was telling leaders of the world's most powerful economies that Iran was about to surrender, asserting that no one was left alive in Tehran with the authority to accept terms, and that the regime had already collapsed. He made these claims publicly while their intelligence services were examining the same footage visible to the rest of the world. In the next few minutes, I will outline exactly what transpired, why the White House failed to anticipate the backlash, and how the global order you inhabit today appears fundamentally different from the one you awoke to just a week ago. Imagine having a business partner, one not perfect, with whom you don't always see eye to eye, but a partner you've worked alongside for decades. You've helped build their infrastructure, guaranteed their security, and protected their energy supply. Now envision that this partner initiates a war without informing you, sends troops into conflict without congressional authorization, without consulting the coalition, and without a clear exit strategy. Then they call you on a video conference to declare the war is essentially over and the enemy has surrendered, all while you're watching live footage of that supposedly defeated enemy marching in the streets. How long would it take before you start making your own calls? How long before you discreetly reach out to Tehran directly? Keep that thought in mind, as that is precisely what France and Italy have just done. I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. At what point does a fractured alliance become an opportunity for realignment? Let's rewind the clock. This situation did not begin on March 12th. It did not start with the KC-135 crash or with Trump's G7 call. The escalation can be traced back to a diplomatic window that existed and was deliberately closed. Iran had been engaged in negotiations, with their foreign minister communicating through the Omani channel. A framework was on the table, but according to multiple reports, the United States bypassed that framework entirely. Trump acted, Israel acted, and strikes commenced before any allied consultations, before any congressional vote, and before any legal authorization that could withstand constitutional scrutiny. Arab nations warned against it. American generals cautioned against it. The strategic picture was clearly laid out for anyone willing to observe. No one with a serious background in regional analysis believed that airstrikes alone would lead to a clean surrender. Iran is not a small proxy militia. It is a nation-state with deep institutional resilience, a populace capable of rallying around nationalist sentiments, and a geographic choke point that holds more value than any missile battery. Nevertheless, the decision was made, and now we are living with the consequences. Receipt number 1, the KC-135 and the cost that no one is accounting for. On March 12, 2026, a United States Air Force KC-135 Stratotanker, with its serial number and crew identities withheld pending notification of next of kin, crashed in western Iraq. CENTCOM confirmed that it was not due to hostile fire or friendly fire. 2 aircraft were involved in what appears to have been a mid-air incident during an aerial refueling operation. This incident marks the first confirmed loss of a KC-135 since 2013. These are not fighter jets. They are not expendable assets. The KC-135 serves as the circulatory system of American air power. Without tankers, strike packages cannot reach their targets, and fighter jets cannot maintain their operational tempo. Losing one in a non-combat incident during a high-tempo war is not merely a tragedy for 6 families. It signals operational strain on the entire aerial architecture of Operation Epic Fury. Air Force Chief of Staff General Ken Wilsbach acknowledged the devastation in a statement. But the deeper question that no one in the Pentagon briefing room was asking is this: if the war is going as well as advertised, why are tankers falling from friendly airspace? The official answer is still under investigation, but the operational reality is already beginning to answer that question. Receipt number 2, Trump's G7 call and the gap between the narrative and the reality. On March 12th, President Trump held a virtual meeting with G7 leaders. According to 3 officials from G7 countries briefed on the call, Trump told them that Iran was about to surrender. He went further, suggesting that there were no Iranian officials left alive, with the authority to formally accept surrender terms. Nobody knows who the leader is, he reportedly stated, so there is no one to announce the surrender, but they have surrendered. Meanwhile, Iran's leaders were not hiding underground. They were not cowering in bunkers. Instead, they were in Tehran's central square for Quds Day, the annual national commemoration, marching publicly alongside the Iranian president and foreign minister. General Ahmad Raza Radan was visible, as was Ali Larijani, head of the National Security Council. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stood in front of cameras, criticizing Washington and praising Iranian unity, showing no signs of retreat. The gap between what Trump told the G7 and what the rest of the world was witnessing in real time was not merely a gap of interpretation or intelligence lag, it was a chasm. The G7 leaders on that call were aware of this discrepancy. They had access to the same footage and reporting, yet the American president was describing an alternate reality. When your closest allies stop believing your briefings, you have not just lost a battle, you have lost the very foundation of persuasion that alliances are built upon. Receipt number 3. France, Italy, India, and Turkey go directly to Tehran. This is the most crucial receipt for the long-term implications. France and Italy, both NATO members and countries that still had troops stationed in Iraq supporting American-led operations, have initiated direct diplomatic talks with Iran. The goal, as reported by the Financial Times citing officials briefed on these efforts, is to negotiate safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz for their commercial and energy vessels. Italy's defense minister, Guido Crosetto, publicly stated that Europe needs to speak with a unified voice, and that voice must directly ask Iran for the right of non-belligerent ships to pass, not through Washington, but directly to Tehran. This is not just a European issue. India's Prime Minister Modi is also in direct contact with Iranian officials to secure an oil supply agreement. Turkey has already received permission from Iranian authorities for one Turkish-owned vessel to transit the strait after docking at an Iranian port. These are not symbolic gestures. They represent structural reroutes. Once these structural changes are made, they do not simply reverse when political conditions shift. Washington was absent from all these conversations, and that absence is not a coincidence. It is a verdict. If this narrative is connecting dots that you haven't seen assembled together anywhere else, you are already ahead of the curve compared to most people trying to follow this war in real time. Hit subscribe right now, as this story is accelerating faster than any single outlet can track, and you need to be here when the next piece drops. Most governments, when facing military pressure, either capitulate or escalate. Iran appears to have chosen a third path. It has positioned itself as the indispensable negotiating partner for every country that relies on energy flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. While the American narrative insists on portraying Iran as cornered and desperate, the diplomatic traffic tells a different story. Iran is not negotiating from a position of weakness. It is issuing terms. Their message to Arab diplomats, reported by the Wall Street Journal, is clear. Any deal must guarantee safety for all parties, or there will be safety for none. Compare that posture to Washington's. While Iran conducts bilateral diplomacy with India, Turkey, France, and Italy simultaneously, Pentagon spokesperson Pete Hegseth held a press conference where he complained about CNN's headlines, called for a MAGA-aligned billionaire to take over the network sooner rather than later, and insisted that the Strait of Hormuz was functionally open, all while ships were being struck by projectiles in the very waters he was describing. That is not strategic communication. That is theater performed for an audience that is rapidly shrinking outside American borders. You do not win a geopolitical contest by controlling press conferences. You win it by being the party that other nations need. Right now, by every measurable metric of diplomatic traffic, Iran is that party far more than Washington is. So, what does this mean for you? If you heat your home with gas, if your supply chain navigates global shipping lanes, or if your pension fund holds energy stocks, this is not an abstract geopolitical story. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz typically accounts for about 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas. That flow has significantly decreased since the war began, leading to rising oil prices. In a revealing acknowledgement of the pressure, the United States issued a 30-day emergency license for countries to purchase Russian oil currently at sea. The same Russian oil whose sanctions Trump lifted, and the same Russia that European leaders like Costa have criticized for being rewarded for its aggression against the West. Italy has begun withdrawing its remaining troops from Iraq, and one French soldier has already been killed at a joint base in Erbil, with 6 more seriously injured. The coalition that America assembled, despite its imperfections, is actively dismantling itself. Once a country withdraws its forces and opens its own diplomatic channels with your adversary, the institutional memory of that realignment does not disappear when headlines shift. Jobs will follow the new routes, contracts will follow the new partnerships, and they are unlikely to return. 3 plausible scenarios are now emerging, each leading to different outcomes. Scenario 1 is a managed de-escalation. Financial markets, energy companies, and institutional pressure from within the G7 could force a diplomatic off-ramp. A face-saving framework might be constructed, possibly through an Omani or Qatari channel, allowing both sides to claim partial victory. The bombing would pause, and the strait would reopen under negotiated terms. However, the structural changes would already be in place. Europe's direct trade channel, India's oil agreements, and Turkey's port arrangements would remain intact, altering the architecture even in the most optimistic outcome. Scenario 2 involves a broader realignment. Other middle powers observing France and Italy's moves may conclude that the same logic applies to them and establish their own diplomatic networks. This could lead to a parallel diplomatic structure that roots around Washington for energy, trade, and regional security discussions. The United States would still be the world's largest military power, but it would lose its role as the indispensable mediator. The center would hold, but it would no longer be the only center. Scenario 3 is the one no one wants to name out loud: escalation. If Washington interprets European diplomatic outreach to Tehran as a betrayal and responds with economic pressure on its own allies, if the war expands into new theaters, or if another major asset goes down in a way that cannot be attributed to non-combat causes, the fractures could deepen into breaks. NATO, already strained, would face an institutional crisis it was not designed to weather. Energy prices could spike to levels that trigger political upheaval in multiple democracies simultaneously. This is the scenario that every serious analyst is modeling and hoping to avoid. What we know for certain, regardless of how the next week unfolds, is that the relationship between Washington and its traditional allies will not simply revert to the status quo of January 2025. Even if a ceasefire is announced tomorrow, the lessons have already been learned in every European capital, as well as in New Delhi and Ankara. The lesson is clear. The United States under this administration does not consult before acting, does not honor traditional coalition structures, and describes battlefield realities in terms that bear no relation to what allied intelligence services are independently observing. You do not unlearn that lesson, you build around it. 6 Americans died in western Iraq on March 12th. Their sacrifice deserves more than a press conference where a defense secretary complains about newspaper headlines. It merits a sober and honest accounting of whether the strategic objectives that led to their deployment are coherent, achievable, and lawfully authorized. By every available measure, that accounting has yet to be made. Did Iran's position as the indispensable guardian of the strait emerge from its own strategy, or did Washington's approach create that situation? Is European outreach to Tehran a smart act of self-preservation or a fracture that will haunt the alliance for generations? And who ultimately bears responsibility for a war that no allied nation was consulted about, that lacks congressional authorization, and for which 6 American families must now grieve without a comprehensive explanation of how their loved ones died? I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe now, as the next chapters are unfolding rapidly. Watch for what happens when the Hormuz negotiations either succeed or collapse, when the investigation into the KC-135 releases its findings, and when the debate over congressional authorization can no longer be postponed. This story is not slowing down, so do not look away. Please note that this content serves as commentary and analysis for informational purposes only. It does not constitute financial, legal, or geopolitical advice. All claims are based on publicly reported information and should be understood as analytical interpretations, not verified intelligence. Consult qualified experts before making decisions based on the contents of this analysis.